The orbital summit station Vega conquered hung in the silent dark above Earth like a silver seed pod, its curved halls lit by soft blue lights and filled with the low hum of 100 alien tongues. Delegates from over 200 species moved through its corridors, some on legs, some on wheels, some floating in personal force fields. Among them walked Paul Dawson, human ambassador to the Galactic Council, his dark suit slightly rumpled, his face calm but tired. Beside him strode Lena Ortiz, Earth's top astrophysicist and scientific advisor. Her eyes sharp behind thin-rimmed glasses, her posture straight, despite the weight of months of fruitless debate. They were heading to Chamber 7, where the Council would vote on the fate of Proxima b, a world humans had spent 30 years terraforming. Oxygen levels were stable, rivers flowed, forests grew. It was Earth's first true off-world home, built not with conquest but with patience, sweat, and recycled starlight. Yet the Council had called it into question, not for safety or ethics, but because, as one Thalari elder had sniffed during a private meeting, humans act like pioneers, not stewards. Inside the chamber, the air was cool and still. Curved benches rose in concentric rings around a central dais where the voting orbs hovered. Paul and Lena took their seats in the human section, small, tucked near the back as always. Around them, beings of every shape and origin waited. The Krell, tall and armored, clicked their mandibles in quiet conversation. The Vosh, gelatinous and translucent, pulsed with soft violet light. High Arbiter Navora of the Thalari stood at the center, her silver robes shimmering, her voice calm as she called the session to order. "The matter before us," she said, "is Resolution 4472, the reclassification of Proxima b from Human Development Zone to Shared Stewardship Territory under Council oversight." Paul's jaw tightened. Shared stewardship meant human authority would be stripped away. Decisions about crops, settlements, even school curriculums would require approval from a committee that had never set foot on red soil or breathed air they hadn't filtered through a machine. Lena leaned toward him. "They're not even pretending it's about ecology anymore," she whispered. "It's about control." Paul nodded but said nothing. He had learned long ago that shouting in this room only made humans look emotional, unstable in the eyes of the older races. One by one, species presented their arguments. A Zin delegate droned on about historical precedents and galactic harmony. A Vosh representative oozed forward and claimed humans lacked the temporal patience required for planetary guardianship. When it was Paul's turn, he stood slowly, adjusted his cuffs, and stepped to the speaking plate. "Proxima b was dead rock when we arrived," he began, his voice quiet but clear. "No atmosphere, no water, just dust and silence. For 30 years, men and women from Earth lived in domes, recycled every drop of water, planted every seed by hand. They didn't take the planet, they gave it life." He paused, looking not at the Arbiter, but at the faces around him. "You call us impulsive. You say we rush. But we didn't rush Proxima b, we waited. We listened to the soil. We learned from our mistakes. And now, when the trees finally bear fruit, you want to take the orchard away because we don't speak your language perfectly or bow deeply enough." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some species shifted uncomfortably. Others stared with cold indifference. Then came the vote. The orbs glowed, green for yes, red for no. One by one they lit up. Green, 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 the Krell voted yes. The Zin, yes. Even neutral species fearing Council backlash turned their orbs green. Only 3 voted red. The small colony of Lyrans, who owed Earth a debt from a rescue mission years ago, and 2 independents who admired human tenacity. The resolution passed. High Arbiter Navora announced the result in her measured tone. "Resolution 4472 is adopted. Proxima b shall transition to Council stewardship within 6 solar cycles." Paul didn't move for a long moment. Lena placed a hand on his arm, but he gently pulled away. He walked back to the speaking plate, though no one had called on him. The chamber quieted again, curious. "You speak of maturity," Paul said, his voice still calm, but something deeper now, something final. "But maturity isn't measured in how long your species has flown between stars. It's measured in how you treat those who are trying to grow." He looked around, meeting the gaze of every delegate he could. "For 50 years, humanity has sat at your table. We've followed your rules, accepted your judgments even when they were unfair. We've shared our science, our music, our stories. We asked only for respect in return." He took a breath. "Today you showed us we will never get it. Then, in a move no one expected, Paul turned to Lena and nodded. She stood. Together, they walked to the center of the chamber and placed their official insignia, small silver discs bearing Earth's emblem, on the dais. Effective immediately, Paul announced. The Terran delegation withdraws from all proceedings of the Galactic Council. We will no longer participate in votes, negotiations, or joint operations. Our communications channels will be closed to Council traffic within 24 hours. Silence. Not the polite silence of protocol, but the stunned silence of disbelief. No species had ever left the Council voluntarily. It was like a child walking out on its own family, not in anger, but in sorrow, with eyes wide open. Paul and Lena turned and walked out. Their footsteps echoed in the vast chamber. Behind them, whispers erupted, sharp, confused, urgent. A Krell envoy stood knocking over his bench. Avash pulsed erratically. High Arbiter Navora remained still. Her face unreadable, but her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her data slate. Outside, in the corridor, the air felt lighter. Lena exhaled. Do you think they'll come after us? Paul shook his head. Not today, but they'll talk. And for the first time, they'll be talking about us, not down to us. They boarded the human shuttle waiting at Docking Bay 12. As the engines hummed to life and the station shrank behind them, Earth rose in the viewport, blue, green, fragile, and fiercely alive. Paul didn't look back at Vega Conquered. He didn't need to. He knew what he'd left behind. Not just a council chamber, but an old dream of belonging. Now a new one would begin, and somewhere in the galaxy, the first thread of a very old system had just snapped. Back on Earth, the news spread fast. Screens in every city flashed the same headline: Humans leave Galactic Council. In cafes, factories, and classrooms, people paused. Some frowned. Some cheered. In a small town in Ohio, a retired engineer named Carl watched the broadcast with his granddaughter and muttered, "About time we stopped begging for a seat at their table." In Mumbai, students debated whether Earth could survive alone. In Nairobi, street artists painted murals of Paul Dawson, walking away from a crumbling star-shaped throne. President Diane Carter addressed the world that evening from the White House lawn. She wore a simple navy dress, no medals, no grand podium. "We did not leave out of pride," she said, her voice steady. "We left because dignity is not something you ask for. It's something you protect." She announced that Earth would now manage its own defense, trade, and diplomacy. Human ships would stop joining joint patrols. All shared data streams with the Council would be shut down. And Proxima B, though legally under Council control, would remain protected by Earth's fleet until further notice. Paul and Lena moved into temporary offices in Geneva, working with a small team to rebuild Earth's foreign policy from the ground up. There were no alien advisors whispering in their ears. No translation delays. No need to soften their words for ancient sensibilities. Decisions were made quickly. Human freighters rerouted through neutral systems. Engineers began upgrading old defense satellites. Farmers on Mars and Luna were told to increase food output, just in case. At first, life felt lighter. People walked taller. Songs about independence topped the charts. Children wrote school essays titled, "What Earth Can Do Alone." But soon the costs began to show. A shipment of rare isotopes from the Zinn Collective never arrived, officially due to logistical review. Human-made medicines that relied on Krell-grown compounds doubled in price. On Proxima B, colonists reported strange signal jamming near the new Council observation posts. No violence, just pressure, quiet, constant pressure. Meanwhile, in the wider galaxy, the absence of humans created a ripple no one had predicted. The Krell and the Vosh had been on the edge of war for years over a disputed nebula, rich in quantum crystals. Humans had always stepped in, offering neutral ground, fair maps, even shared mining tech to split the resources. Without that buffer, a minor skirmish near the Helios Rift exploded into full combat. Krell warships fired on Vosh freighters. The Vosh retaliated by poisoning Krell water recyclers with biosludge. Dozens died. The Council scrambled to respond. Emergency sessions were called. But without human logistics officers, who had quietly managed half the Council's supply chains, the relief efforts stalled. A rescue fleet got lost in a solar storm because the human-piloted navigation buoys had gone dark. Refugees piled up on border stations, hungry and scared. Worse still was the void drift. For months, Strange distortions had been appearing in hyperspace lanes, ripples that shredded ship hulls and scrambled AI minds. Lena Ortiz had been leading a joint task force to study it. Her team had discovered the drift wasn't natural. It was a side effect of unstable dark matter reactors used by old Council warships. She'd proposed a fix: recalibrate all reactors using a human-designed harmonic dampener. The Council had delayed the vote, calling her solution risky and untested. Now, with humans gone, the drift worsened. 3 cargo ships vanished in 1 week. Trade between star systems slowed to a crawl. Panic spread. On the pleasure moon of Series 9, merchants began hoarding goods. On Thalari Prime, elders whispered that the galaxy was losing its rhythm. Back on Earth, Lena worked late into the night in a quiet lab beneath the Swiss Alps. She wasn't officially on the Council project anymore, but she couldn't stop thinking about the drift. She ran simulations on old servers using public data and her own notes. Paul found her there one evening, surrounded by glowing screens. "You're still trying to fix their mess," he said, handing her a cup of tea. "They're not just them," Lena replied, not looking up. "Innocent people are dying. Families, kids. Just because their leaders are stubborn doesn't mean they deserve to vanish in a warp bubble." Paul sat beside her. "We can't save everyone if we lose ourselves." "I know," she said softly. "But maybe we don't have to choose." Outside, snow began to fall. Earth felt quiet, almost peaceful. But in the silence, something else was growing. Not just independence, but responsibility. Not to the Council, but to the truth. In orbit, the last human ship disconnected from the Council comms array. A soft chime marked the end of the link. On the bridge, Captain Ruiz watched the signal fade. "Tell Geneva we're clean," he said. "No ties, no debts. Just us." Down below, in 1,000 cities, people went about their lives. They didn't know about the war brewing near the Helios Rift. They didn't see the flickering hyperspace lanes. But they felt it. In the empty shelves at stores, in the longer waits for off-world parts, in the quiet pride mixed with worry in their parents' eyes. Earth was alone now. Truly alone. And for the first time in 50 years, it had to decide not what the galaxy wanted from it, but what it wanted for itself. Far away, on a neutral trading post near the Orion Arm, a young Krell mechanic played a human song on a cracked audio chip. It was an old folk tune, simple and sad. Around him, other aliens listened. No one spoke. They just heard the voice, clear, human, unafraid, and wondered why they'd ever stopped listening. Months passed. Earth settled into a new rhythm. Factories hummed with renewed purpose, building ships not for joint fleets but for home defense. Farmers on Luna doubled their wheat output. Schools added courses in xenolinguistics, not to please the Council but to understand the galaxy on human terms. People learned to live with less off-world tech, fixing old machines, sharing spare parts, inventing new ways to do old things. There was hardship, yes, but also a strange kind of joy, the kind that comes from knowing you're standing on your own feet. Paul Dawson spent his days in quiet meetings, training young diplomats in Geneva. He taught them not to argue for acceptance, but to speak with clarity and conviction. "They don't have to like us," he'd say. "They just have to understand us." His students, men and women from Jakarta, Lagos, Buenos Aires, listened carefully, taking notes in worn notebooks. They were the next wave, raised not in the shadow of the Council but in the light of Earth's choice. Lena Ortiz rarely left her lab. She worked with a small team of physicists and engineers, all volunteers, all driven by the same quiet worry. The void drift was getting worse. Reports trickled in through neutral traders, ships lost, colonies cut off, entire systems going dark. Lena knew the Council still hadn't solved it. Their best minds were stuck in old ways, refusing to accept that human intuition could complement their rigid logic. So she kept working. She tested harmonic dampeners on scale models. She ran simulations until her eyes burned, and slowly, quietly, she got closer to a real fix. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Council was falling apart. The war between the Krell and the Vosh had spread to 3 more systems. Refugees flooded neutral zones. Trade routes collapsed. The Thalari, once seen as wise and unshakable, were now blamed for inaction. On the Council floor, voices rose in anger. The Zin demanded emergency powers. The Lyrans called for a return to human mediation. Even the proud Krell elders whispered that the humans knew how to make peace without shame. But pride ran deep. No one wanted to be the first to ask Earth for help. Instead, they sent spies. Small, unmarked ships drifted near Earth's orbital perimeter watching. They saw human freighters moving in tight, efficient convoys. They saw new defense satellites blinking to life. They saw no panic, no begging, just calm, steady work. On entertainment hubs like Nova Station, something unexpected happened. Human culture began to spread faster than ever. Old movies, once dismissed as overly emotional, were now studied for their insights into conflict and forgiveness. Human music, simple guitar songs, soulful jazz, even protest folk, filled bars and lounges. A Vosh poet translated Emily Dickinson into gel rhythms and became famous overnight. A Krell warrior tattooed a line from a Langston Hughes poem across his armor before heading into battle. Humans weren't just gone, they were missed. Back on Earth, President Diane Carter faced growing pressure. Some advisors urged her to reach out, to offer a hand before things got worse. Others warned it was a trap, that the Council would take help and give nothing in return. Diane listened to both sides, but she kept her own counsel. She visited Proxima B in secret. Walking among the colonists, listening to their fears, she saw children playing in red soil, breathing air their grandparents had made possible. She knew Earth couldn't hide forever, but it also couldn't return as a servant. One evening, she met Paul and Lena in a quiet garden behind the Geneva offices. The air was warm, crickets chirping. No guards, no recorders. They're breaking, Diane said. Not just the war, the whole system. Without us, they don't know how to hold it together. Maybe they need to fall apart, Paul replied. Maybe that's the only way they'll learn. Lena looked up from her tablet. Falling apart means people die. Real people. Not politicians. Not delegates, mothers, teachers, kids who never asked for any of this. Silence settled over them. The weight of that truth hung in the air. Then Diane said, "We don't have to go back to the table, but we don't have to stay silent either." The next week, Earth did something unexpected. It opened a public science channel, not for the Council, but for anyone with a receiver. Lena uploaded raw data on the void drift, along with her proposed solution. No demands, no conditions, just knowledge freely given. Within hours, independent scientists across the galaxy downloaded it. By the next day, 3 neutral systems reported successful dampener tests. The Council was furious. The Zin called it unauthorized interference. The Thalari warned it could destabilize galactic protocols. But the people, the real people, cheered. Ships that had been stranded for weeks fired up their engines and jumped to safety. For the first time in months, hope flickered. On Earth, no one celebrated loudly. There were no parades. But in labs, in shipyards, in quiet homes, people felt something shift. They weren't just surviving. They were helping, on their own terms. And far away in the shadows of Vega Conquered, a Thalari scholar named Elira Voss watched the human data stream with tears in her eyes. She had spent her life studying Earth, not as a threat, but as a mystery. Now she understood. Humans didn't want to rule the galaxy. They just wanted to belong in it as equals. And in walking away, they had shown everyone what true strength looked like. She made a decision that night. She would go to Earth, not as a spy, not as a delegate, but as a student. To learn, to listen, and maybe, just maybe, to ask for forgiveness. But she would wait. Because she knew Earth wouldn't answer a plea shouted in panic. It would only answer one spoken in truth. And truth, she realized, took time. The war near the Helios Rift reached its worst point on a cold Tuesday in October. A Krell battlecruiser, damaged and drifting, fired its last plasma charge into a Vosh civilian transport, carrying over 2,000 souls. The ship broke apart in silence, its pieces scattering like ash across the void. The news spread fast, not through official channels, but through smugglers, traders, and refugee comms. For the first time, the galaxy saw the true cost of a peace no one knew how to make. On Earth, President Diane Carter watched the footage in her private office. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were wet. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she called Paul and Lena to Geneva, not for a meeting, but for a choice. 3 days later, a single ship appeared on the edge of Sol system. It was small, unarmed, painted in the silver and white of the Thalari, but it flew no council banner. Instead, a simple symbol glowed on its hull, an open hand. Earth's defense grid locked on, ready to fire, but the ship sent no threat codes. Only a message in clear English: "We come to listen." Paul stood in the observation room at Geneva Spaceport, arms crossed, watching the feed. Lena stood beside him, quiet. They had expected spies, maybe a demand, maybe even an attack. Not this. Who's on it? Paul asked. Ambassador Illyra Voss, came the reply. Thalari scholar. Former head of human cultural studies at the Galactic Archives. No military record. No political ties, Lena frowned. She wrote that book on Earth's poetry during the resource wars. Said our words held more truth than our weapons. Paul didn't answer right away. He remembered that book. He'd read it during his first lonely year on Vega Concord when no one would sit with him at meals. The ship was allowed to land. Not in a grand hangar, not with fanfare, but at a quiet civilian dock on the edge of Geneva. Illyra Voss stepped out alone. She wore simple gray robes, her silver hair braided loosely over one shoulder. She carried no bag, no datapad, no weapon, just herself. She was met by a single human officer who led her to a small conference room in a low building near Lake Geneva. No flags, no cameras, just a table, 4 chairs, and a pot of coffee. President Carter arrived first. Then Paul, then Lena. They sat without speaking. Illyra looked at each of them, then bowed slightly. Not the deep, formal bow of council protocol, but a gentle dip of the head, like one friend greeting another after a long silence. I am not here on behalf of the council, she said, her voice soft but clear. I speak only for myself, and for those who are tired of watching good people suffer while elders argue over pride. She paused, then added, we were wrong. Those 3 words hung in the air like a bell. Paul studied her. Wrong about what? About you, she said. We called you loud, impatient, emotional. We said you didn't understand the weight of time. But you understood something we forgot. That peace is not kept by silence, but by honesty. That progress is not given, it is built hand by hand, even when your hands shake. She looked at Lena. Your data on the Void Drift saved 12 ships last week. 12 crews came home because you chose to share what you knew, even after we turned you away. Then she turned to Diane. And you, your people could have hidden. You could have sealed your borders and let the galaxy burn, but you didn't. You stayed open, not with weapons, but with knowledge. She took a breath. So I am here to ask, not as a Thalari, not as a council member, but as someone who has spent a lifetime studying your kind and finally sees what I missed. Teach us how to listen. Silence filled the room. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently on the windows. Paul leaned forward. Why now? Why you? Because the council is broken, Illyra said. The elders won't admit fault. The young are angry but lost. And the war, it's spreading. If it reaches the neutral colonies, millions will die. We tried to fix it ourselves. We failed. She looked down at her hands. I read your history. After your Second World War, you built new systems, not to punish, but to heal. You made the United Nations, not because you trusted everyone, but because you knew you couldn't survive alone. That is what we need now. Not more rules. A new heart, Lena spoke for the first time. You want us to come back to the same table that called us children? No, Illyra said quickly. Not the same table. A new one. Built together, with your voice equal to any elders. With your ethics written into its foundation. With real power, not just a vote, but a say in who gets to speak at all. Paul exchanged a look with Diane. They had talked about this. Dreamed of it, even. But dreams and reality were different things. What guarantee do we have? Paul asked. That this isn't just a trick to get our tech, our ships, our help, and then push us back to the back row once the crisis passes? Illyra met his eyes. None, except this. I will stay. If you agree to talk, I will remain on Earth as a witness. If the council breaks its word, I will stand with you and tell the galaxy the truth. My name, my life, my honor, I offer them as surety. That night, the 3 humans met in Diane's temporary apartment above the lake. Rain still fell. The city lights shimmered on the water. She's sincere, Lena said. I've read her work for years. She's never bent to council pressure. She's also one voice, Paul replied. What if the others ignore her? Then we make sure they can't, Diane said. We don't go back to beg. We go back to rebuild. But only if the terms are clear from the start. They talked until dawn. By sunrise, they had their answer. The next morning, they returned to the small room. Illyra waited, calm, patient. Paul spoke first. We will consider rejoining talks, but only if the council agrees to 3 things. 1, full voting equality for Earth, no exceptions. 2. A new charter that includes human principles, like the right to self-determination and the duty to protect civilians in war. 3. A reform committee co-chaired by a human with power to review all council decisions. Elira didn't hesitate. I will carry these terms to the High Arbiter myself, and I will fight for them, Lena added. And if you agree, we'll share the full void drift solution. Not just the fix, but how to prevent it from ever happening again. Elira smiled, the first real smile any of them had seen. Then there is hope. As she left the room, she paused at the door. Thank you, she said softly, for not giving up on us. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the lake. Earth hadn't said yes yet, but for the first time in months, it had opened the door. And on the other side, someone was finally ready to walk through it, not as a master, not as a beggar, but as a partner. The council did not change overnight, but it began to change. Elira Voss returned to Vega Concord with Earth's terms, and for the first time in centuries, the High Chamber fell into true debate. Not the polite theater of old, but raw, honest argument. Some elders called the human demands outrageous. Others admitted quietly that the system had grown rotten. The Krell, weary of war and losing ships to the void drift, surprised everyone by supporting the reforms. The Vosh, after reviewing Lena's full data package, agreed that human science had saved their outer colonies. Even the Zin, after days of closed-door talks, gave a stiff nod. 6 weeks later, a new resolution passed, not by a slim margin, but by a clear majority. The Galactic Concord Charter was rewritten. Earth was granted equal standing. A reform committee was formed, with Paul Dawson named co-chair alongside Elira. And for the first time, minor species, the Lyrans, the Sen, the quiet plant people of Xylos, were given observer seats with real speaking rights. Human delegates returned to Vega Concord. But this time they did not sit in the back. Their section was moved to the center, level with the Thalari and Krell. Paul walked in without fanfare, wearing a simple dark suit, his insignia now bearing not just Earth's emblem, but the new Concord symbol, a circle of hands, each different, holding one another. Lena Ortiz led the Joint Science Task Force from a newly built lab on the station's quietest ring. She worked side by side with a young Vosh physicist and a Krell engineer, combining human intuition with alien precision. Within a month, they deployed the final version of the harmonic dampener across all major hyperspace lanes. The void drift faded like a bad dream. Ships moved freely again. Trade resumed. Families reunited. On Proxima B, the council observation posts were quietly withdrawn. The colonists held a festival under the twin suns, planting a grove of earth oaks in the red soil. Children ran through the trees, laughing in a language that was neither old nor new but simply theirs. Back on Earth, life did not return to what it had been. People had tasted independence and they would not forget it. But they also saw the value of connection, when it was fair, when it was mutual. Schools taught not just human history but galactic civics. Artists collaborated with off-world creators. Engineers shared designs freely and, in return, received alien alloys that made solar panels twice as efficient. President Diane Carter stepped down at the end of her term, not with a grand speech but with a quiet walk through a public garden in Chicago. She stopped to talk to a group of students building a model of the new Concord station. Remember, she told them, power isn't about having the loudest voice. It's about knowing when to walk away and when to come back. Paul spent less time in chambers and more time listening. He visited refugee camps near the Helios Rift, not as a diplomat but as a human. He sat with mothers who had lost sons, with pilots who had flown through the drift and lived. He didn't promise miracles, he just listened. And in doing so, he helped stitch the galaxy back together, one honest conversation at a time. Lena, ever the scientist, kept her feet on the ground. She returned to Earth often, walking the hills of New Mexico where she'd grown up, staring at the stars not as problems to solve, but as neighbors to understand. She started a program to train young minds from every world in the Concord, not to make them like humans, but to help them find their own way. One morning, months after the reforms began, Paul stood on a balcony in Geneva. The city below was waking up, buses humming, cafes opening, children heading to school. Above, the sky was clear. 3 ships passed overhead, their hulls marked with the new Concord emblem. One was human, one was Thalari, one was Vosh. They flew in loose formation, not in military lockstep, but in easy rhythm, like birds sharing the same sky. He sipped his coffee, warm and bitter. He thought of the day he walked out of the council chamber, heart heavy but head high. He hadn't known then if it would lead to war or peace. He only knew it was right. Now the galaxy was not perfect. Old grudges lingered. Mistakes would be made. But something fundamental had shifted. The council was no longer a club of elders deciding for the many. It was becoming a table where all voices mattered, even the ones that once spoke too loudly, too soon, too humanly. And that, Paul thought, was worth every moment of silence, every hard choice, every lonely night. Far away, on a quiet moon near the Orion Arm, a Krell child played a human lullaby on a small flute made of recycled ship metal. The notes drifted into the stars, simple and clear. No one owned them. No one controlled them. They just were. And in that moment, the galaxy felt a little more like home.